Hello, good morning, and good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this session of Build AI powered MVPs with Google AI Studio, organized by Adaptix Academy. And as you all know, my name is Raval, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. And in this session is the part of AI capacity building for workforce transformation and digital readiness under AI Opportunity Fund for Asia Pacific, an initiative of AVPN with support from Google and Asian Development Bank. And we Adaptex Hub are the local training providers to implement this project. And today's session focuses on Google AI Studio, where you will learn about authentication, users, and synchronization. Just few housekeeping points. Please keep your microphones muted during this session to avoid any background noises. And you may post your questions in the chat. We will be addressing them in our Q&A segment. And also, we will be recording the session for our learning and attendance purposes. And we also request you all to please stay connected with us, because at the end, we'll be having a group photo, which will be marked as your attendance. And also, if you can see that I've already shared a QR. You can scan it and mark your attendance. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Zafi Sharhan Sayed is an AI expert, and he holds PhD from Cardiff University, UK, with an extensive experience in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And he has been actively involved in helping individuals and organizations understand and apply AI tools in practical settings. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Zafi Sharan Sayed. And please feel free to write down your questions while we'll be having this session. So Dr. Zafi, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and good morning. So I am Zafi Sharhan. This is the third session in the series of creating MVPs using vibe coding with Cloud Code and Google AI Studio. This particular session wouldn't be as much about vibe coding per se, and actually focus on what to do after you have vibe coded a web application. So imagine this. You have created an application, you spent considerable time vibe coding it, you have gone back and forth with the AI in order to make sure that the application suits what your requirements are. What would the next steps be? Now, the first step would be that you'd like to test it, and perhaps you've already done that yourself. But what you'd also like to do is to share it with a select group of people so that they can test it, whether it indeed fulfills their requirements. Maybe they have good feedback that you want to incorporate. So you would like to share it with a select pool of potential users. And of course, for that, we need to add a couple of features. The first such feature would be authentication, so that only people whom you permit can use your web app. And the second feature that we would like to add is data synchronization or persistent storage, so that users can enter data, save it, and then see their data across different devices, cell phones, laptops, and also at different times. In the web apps that we've created over the past two sessions, we did not add authentication, and there was certainly no database synchronization. So the URLs that we had created on Wednesday could be accessible by anyone on the internet, and they can also enter their data, for example, in the dashboards. But once they close their browser, the data basically vanishes because it was just stored in the local storage of the browser. So what you'll see in this session is that we'll add authentication so that people that we permit to use our app can use that app. We will see how to create and add users. And we'll also add synchronization so that if someone enters their data today, then it's sort of stored as long as we want that data to be stored. Now we'll set all this up, and we'll then create a new host for our web application. So let's get started and see how we can add those features. Now, in order to have like an illustration of what we want to go for, I sort of created this process flow diagram so that you can visually get an understanding of what we'd be doing. We'll build a minimal note-taking web application using Google AI Studio, and we won't really spend too much time on making it fancy, changing colors, for example, in the user interface, or add more features, since we've already done that a couple of times. Then we'll use a cloud-based backend service called Supabase in order to add user authentication as well as persistent data storage. And this will actually make sure that only people whom we want can use the app. Then we'll push the code that is written by Google AI Studio to GitHub in order to maintain a repository of our code, a version controlled repository of our code. The reason why we need to use GitHub is because at the end of the day, we're still using vibe coding to write the app. Let's say we're really happy with one version of the code that is written by Google AI Studio. And when we ask it to make one change, it also changes something else. And we don't really like the new change. So what do? Well, we can always pull the previous version from GitHub because it records the code for every push that we make to it. And in fact, GitHub is a necessary tool. Version control, and GitHub is arguably the most popular way to do so, is the most necessary skill for software development. And of course, vibe coding is software development. Now, once we push our code to GitHub and we're happy about how it looks, we will deploy it using two approaches. The first is through the Google AI Studio, which would enable us to host on the subdomain of ai.studio. And this is a free service from Google AI Studio. And as we saw last week, this is actually quite useful. But besides Google AI Studio, if you want to use another service for hosting your web application, I would actually recommend Vercel. And deploying to Vercel would be very easy because we, in the previous step, already pushed our code to GitHub. So you'll see how we can deploy the app through two approaches. So let's go ahead and start in earnest with creating the web app, and step by step, we'll complete these processes. So in order to do so, let's go to Google AI Studio, and we'll enter a prompt. So you'll have to go to New App, and you'll have to enter a prompt regarding creating a note-taking application. And I just want a minimalistic application where we can add notes so that we can add some entries to those notes. And therefore, we can verify that everything is being synchronized. So I'll write something as simple as create a note-taking web app that allows users to organize entries. So something as simple as that. I'm letting the AI Studio figure everything out itself. So let's go to build. Now, before I go to build, I just want to sanity check that I am using the latest Pro model. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, because we've not really requested a lot of features, it will most likely create a fairly basic web application, but it should be good enough for us to begin working with it. So we'll wait, I believe, like 30 or so seconds, and we should have a web app ready by then. So what Google AI Studio does is that it sort of reads what you're working on, and it would propose to you different designs that you can go for. And it's your choice if you want to go ahead and select your design immediately. But if that's not something you want to do, you can always go ahead and change the design later on. What I would encourage is to let AI Studio design an application, see whether it suffices your requirements. Design can always be changed a bit later on. Now, it's actually creating these files. And if you want to see what it's adding, you can actually go to code and you'll find what it's been creating. Because at the end of the day, this is AI that generates these codes, you will find that the design always changes depending on your iteration. So for example, if I'm creating this web application now, if I were to use this exact prompt later on, it would be a slightly different outlook of the web application. But it's mostly okay because through prompts again, we can go ahead and guide AI into generating the type of web app that we want it to. Right. So it's told us that it has created our web application. So it says, I have completed the node organizer application, focusing on a clean, professional, sophisticated three-column design for optimal productivity. So the idea is that it sort of decided that there needs to be folders and then nodes and so on. So I'm actually quite okay with this. And let's just sanity check the web application. We'll try to add a node. So okay, so let's decide if it goes where. Let it be a node title. So let me write colors, red, orange, green. So what I see is that we don't really have an option of save. So I would assume that it's automatically saved. Let's create a new node. Did it get saved somewhere? Yep, so it went to personal. Let's add a new node here. And maybe this could be fruits. So I'll write apples and oranges. So what we can see is we have a note-taking application. It organizes stuff in the form of folders. And I've just entered a couple of notes in the personal folder. We can create new folders. And if we were to modify this, maybe I'd ask it to add a functionality where I could delete folders as well, or perhaps even edit their names. But like I said, we don't really want to be adding more features to this. We want to move towards the next step, which is synchronization and authentication. So let's say I want to share this web app with you. How can I make sure that only select few people can test it and provide me feedback rather than just putting it on the internet? So for this, I'll be using Supabase. Supabase is a backend as a service cloud platform, and it's actually very useful because it will help us do both. It will enable us to add authentication, and it will also enable us to create a managed database. So we don't really need to worry about it much. And it has a generous free tier as well. So you don't need to pay anything in order to just sort of build these vibe coded MVP products. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll have to go to AI Studio again, and I'll tell it to create a login page because at this moment, my application doesn't really have a login page. Once we use the web app, it's directly to the notes section. So the first thing I want it to do is to create a login page. And then I'll also let it know that I intend to use Supabase for authentication and synchronization, and that it should guide me on how to use it. So if it's the first time you're using any feature, whether it be authentication, data synchronization, or web hosting, just feel free to prompt the AI that it should guide you. Once you have created a couple of applications, then you'll just remember those things in muscle memory. But what I'll do is I'll just add as part of my prompt, asking AI Studio to guide me on how to sort of use Supabase. So let me just craft a prompt, and it would be basically asking it in human language, which is essentially the principle of vibe coding. So I want to use Supabase for authentication and data synchronization. I could also write here persistent storage, but I actually prefer using data synchronization. Now, to implement user authentication, I want you to create a login page where the user can enter their username and password. So just as how you would log into your email, we'd like these two things to be there. We could also, for example, implement login through GitHub or login through some other service, like let's say login through Gmail if you're already logged in, but let's keep it simple for now. We just want to implement login through a username and password. Now, also, what I'll say here at this point, I don't want you to add sign up or forgot password options. So the reason why I'm doing this is let's make it very, very simple to set up. Because if we just have username and password and we don't add options of signing up or, for example, password recovery, it's like you're in control of everything. You're in absolute control of who actually gets to use your web application. The only limitation would be that you'll have to manually add users, but that's okay because these are like the first steps. And it's always a good idea to sort of explore how to do this in Supabase. So I've already told what I want. Now I'll just give an instruction that please update the code accordingly. And the second part is I want it to guide me on how to use Supabase. So again, if you're already familiar with how Supabase works, you don't need to ask it about guiding you. But if it's the first time that you're using any service, really, just ask it to help you through the process of setting things up. So one of the things with using these AI tools for building MVPs and vibe coding is that you can ask them to write code, but they also function as chat. So if there's any aspect that you don't really understand, then you can go ahead and ask, and basically the AI would provide its rationale for this. So this, again, should not take too long because we have the core structure of our app already available. It will add a couple of files. So for example, one of the files would be for Supabase itself. And we should also see something regarding a login page being added. So that was Supabase, and this is a login page. And now it should return back the control to us fairly quickly. So of course, it has updated the app as well, just to bring this login page and Supabase sort of merge them together so everything works. It will be sanity checking various other stuff. Now, it is anecdotal experience, but what I find is Claude to still be better for these sanity check operations. Claude will spend more time sort of sanity checking stuff than probably even writing stuff. But the benefit of that is that at the end of the day, it's not going to make a lot of mistakes. It will sort of work itself to just identify bugs and fix them. And hopefully you realized this. In the first session, when we were using Claude Code, it was taking a much longer time in order to uh, like sanity check, even very basic stuff. So we should be getting the control back very quickly now. I think it's gone through all the necessary files. Right, so there we are. So what it's done now is that it has created a login page, and with the login page, it just asks us to enter credentials. So here's the idea. What it's done in the background is that it has sort of created a map of what everything needs to be. But there are still some stuff which is missing. For example, let's go through what it has actually told us, and then I'll try to explain to you what it actually means. Okay, so it says that it has updated application to use Supabase for authentication and synchronization. It has created a login interface so that we can log in over here. And it has added authentication states and data synchronization. But what it does say is that we need to add two pieces of data information from Supabase in order to use this app. So Supabase has not been set up. We already know this. And it's actually asking us to provide two pieces of information. The first one is when you create a database with Supabase, you get like a public URL for that database. So we need to provide that URL. And the second thing is to provide a publishable key or an anon key and like anonymous key. So the idea is that we need to provide these two pieces of information. Now, just so you know, a non-key is now called publishable key. So it's been updated in terms of terminology. And what we expect is that when a newer version of AI Studio would come, they will probably change it to publishable key as well, or something similar. However, from running the code perspective, it's fine because this is, again, just a variable name. So that's the first thing we need to do. How do we go ahead and create a Supabase account? Now, assuming that you already have a GitHub account, you can go to supabase.com and you can log in with your GitHub. So that's what I'll do. Another option is to use your email in order to create a Supabase account. Using GitHub is just more convenient. So let's click here. Because I'm already logged into GitHub, it will probably say everything's okay. So I'm now logged into my Supabase account. And over here, try to zoom this if I can. Over here, I'll go into new project. And here we can define the project name. So let's say this is a note-taking app. So let me call it note-taking app. There has to be a password for the database. Now, this is really important. Now, because this is just a demo, and I'll probably delete this later on, I'll enter some random characters as password. But being mindful of this password is very important because what this password does is to give you access to the entire database, even if you have some security mechanism added in, such as role level security. So just be mindful of this and do not share this with anyone. You can also generate a password, and then you can copy it and you can store it at a safe place. What we can do after this is to select a region. So just select the region which is closest to you. If it's Asia Pacific, we'll just go ahead with it. Now, it's incredibly important to select the option of role level security in the security section. So what this would try to do, and this is not an absolute sense, you'll have to do more, but what this would try to ensure is that every user can only read, edit, write only their particular data, which is associated with their account. So it shouldn't be that user one can view the data of user two and vice versa. And the first step to do so is to enable RLS. So if you're okay with this, then let's create the new project. So what this would do now is to create the project. I don't want to save the database password, so I'll say not now. And this is the main interface or the dashboard for this project. Now, the keys that Google AI Studio was talking about, the URL and the anon key, are actually available here. So if you go to copy, you'll have the project URL. So we'll have to copy this. And we'll also have to copy the publishable key. These two things can be served online. So let's say if you're creating an app, you can provide these two things to anyone you want. They would be able to point towards your database, but they won't be able to access anyone's data because, again, we implemented authentication and we implement or will implement RLS. So let's go here. Let's copy this. I'll copy this in a notepad, and you'll see why I need to do this a bit later on. I'll also copy the anon key. So I have these two variables. Let's enter the data for it. So we're going to go into Supabase. We're first going to copy the project URL. And then we're going to go into the dashboard again. We're going to copy the publishable key as well. Now, the next step is to go back to AI Studio and enter these values. You could possibly enter these values here, But what I prefer to do is to enter them as environment variables. So you can go into settings and let's go right. We'll have secrets. And in secrets, we can enter environment variables. So I'll say add secret. I'll copy the variable name which AI Studio expects. So White Superbase URL. White is like a tool used for front-end development. Superbase, of course, is the managed database we're using. And URL is, of course, this URL, which sort of points towards our database. So in secret name, I'll copy the variable name, and then I'll copy the value. And then we'll create another environment variable, which is sort of secret. And I'll copy this. So the variable name first, and then its value. So the idea is that it's sort of okay to make these publicly available. Just remember, what you shouldn't do is to share the password for the entire database. So if you're okay with this, let's click on Apply Changes. Right, so looks good. Now, of course, we cannot log in just yet because we've not really created users. So we go into the dashboard of Superbase. We'll go into Authentication. In Authentication, we can add users. So let's select Add User. We can create user manually. So remember what we've not done. We've not added the option of signing up. So people cannot sign up. If you want people to sign up, just make sure you have a sign up option. You can ask AI Studio to do so. We can create users manually. This is what I would actually recommend if this is the first time you're creating such apps, or we can send invitations via email. So these would be invites. I'll create the user manually. So create user. I'll write the email address and a password. So we basically, once I click on create user, I'll create a user that can log in with this email address and a password. So let's say create user. Now this user is visible here. This is the user ID, by the way. And we can go to AI Studio. Let's paste the email address. Let's the password and click on sign in. I don't want to save this. So this is like a fresh view of this particular user. So there's no data at all. So if you want to create a folder, we could. And we see the folder. So as it turns out, I think the folder option's not working. But again, I don't really want to fix this. And I want to spend time on actually making things work, in the sense that I want to spend time on connecting Superbase. So let's create two nodes, again, colors, red, yellow, green. And I'll create another node, which would be on fruits. And let's say apple and banana. So we're entering data. But the thing is that data would still not be stored because we have done the authentication part. So for example, if you were to log out and log in again, we'd only be able to see the persistent storage, but the local storage, but there won't be any persistent storage. For this, what we need to do is to create tables. We need to create the actual database where everything would be stored. So if we go to database, in the Superbase dashboard, you'll see it's empty. There are no tables. So even if you have done authentication, you can log in, you can write notes. This is not being stored in a persistent way. So let's look at the guidelines what Superbase provided and see if it makes sense what it says. Right, so it asks us that we need to add the requirement environment variables. We have done that. and it's provided us sort of a tutorial on how to set up Supabase. So the first thing was to add environment variables. It asked us to go into project settings, provide us API, uh, copy the URL, copy the anon key. We did that both. We saved them here. We pushed them to Google AI Studio. And the second thing it suggests is to create tables. Now, tables in Supabase are created through SQL or SQL, structured query language. So what we need to do is to copy this code, which instructs Supabase which tables need to be created. And of course, we'd have folder names and notes, etc. And we need to copy this code and paste it into Supabase SQL editor. So SQL editor, if you go into the dashboard again, this is the SQL editor. So we need to copy that code, we need to paste it here, and then we need to run. So this is the second part where we're sort of ensuring that only verified users can access data of your web application. So actually, this part is also incredibly important. If you are good at SQL, then go ahead, copy this, and maybe just sanity check it. Just read everything and see if it makes sense. If you're not an expert at this, what I would recommend is, even if this is just your vibe coded app that you're playing with, I would recommend to actually copy this code into something like Cloud Code or the newest model of ChatGPT. It's, I think, 5.6 Sol, and just ask it to sanity check, because this is incredibly important. So for now, of course, I'll just assume that AI Studio has provided me the right SQL code. I'll click on run. So it's running this code. It's success. There are no errors. And we can go back and check the database again. And now you'll see the database has been created. What are we storing in the database? We're storing user ID. We're storing folder ID. We're storing title. We're storing the content. And we're storing when it was created and when the note was updated. So this is actually information which would be stored for every single note that we create over here. So this looks good, right? Let us add some other notes and see if we can actually visualize this in Supabase, if we can visualize data in Supabase. Let's create another node. In fact, can we delete these nodes and create them afresh? Let's restart the application. Okay. So let's go for colors once more: red, yellow, let's say green. And I'll add one more node. And so sports. And so what we do now is that we basically entered our data. Now, do remember that what's happening in the background is that we're entering this node. This web application is calling Supabase through this URL. It is providing it the anon key. It is then using the user ID with which I'm logged in to ask Supabase that, hey, this particular user has added new data. So what Supabase would do is first verify that whether this user is actually authenticated and they're permitted to write something in the database. And then it would be a handshake that everything's good. So after that, these two pieces of data would actually be synchronized with Supabase. Now, this is not immediate. It can take a few seconds for everything to work. But what we can do now is just as a sanity check, see whether something's been written in the database. So we can go to Authentication. We'll go into the user. And we can click on View Data as User, just as a sanity check that everything's been synchronized. And let's see if we have any notes. And you can see we do have notes. So we had entered two entries. The first one was colors. The color had entry had content of red, yellow, green. Sports had football and cricket, just as we see the notes here. So you can see that Superbase, these are now logged into the persistent storage of Superbase. So if we were to log out, uh, does our app even have the log out feature? It has. So let's say we are signing out and then we sign in again. You will see our data being stored. Hold on, where's our data? Ah, there we are. Again, it may take a few seconds in order for everything to load, uh, but then it works. I mean, we are using the free tier after all, so it's fine if it's a bit slow. But usually it's faster than this. So here's how you can see that we can actually store stuff. But I hope this also makes you realize that when we're storing data onto Superbase, for example, by default, it's not going to be encrypted. So the admin actually can see what's been stored. So just be careful, because one of the things that we've been talking about throughout this course is if you're using AI for anything really, we sort of have to do it in a responsible way. So for example, if you're creating these vibe coded applications, try to avoid having entered personally identifiable information, medical records, banking information, until you're really sure of, you can secure people's data. So this actually looks good. And what we can go for now is to push the code on GitHub. So let me just check GitHub just to make sure that everything's clean. Right. So we're good with respect to GitHub. We only have the budget tracking application that we created on Wednesday. And what we'll do is to connect GitHub with Google AI Studio to push this particular app over there. So we'll go into settings. We'll go into GitHub. And we'll enter a repository name. So let's say my notes. If there's a space, GitHub typically enters a hyphen. And let's say this is our demo web app with authentication and persistent storage. It's usually a good idea to provide descriptions, especially when you're creating lots of apps. Another thing that you can do is to sort of set whether this application should be set as private, so only you can actually see the source code, or anyone that you add to your GitHub, or whether it should be public. It's generally a good idea to make it private unless you sort of want to show this app off as your vibe coding portfolio. So I'll go on, click GitHub repository. Okay, failed to create GitHub repository, insufficient permissions to create the GitHub repository. Please ensure is okay. So let's go into settings. Let me see why this error occurs. Let's go into applications. So I have a previous instance of AI Studio still sort of being used. I believe we did this last week. So let's revoke this so that the process can start afresh. So let's say try again. Okay, let's sort of refresh this so everything starts fresh. So what I'll do is I'll just refresh the browser state. So let's try this once more. Okay. So sign in, signing into GitHub. So basically what I'm saying is that AI Studio has access to my GitHub. So I'll say all repositories because I'm letting it write new vibe coded applications onto my GitHub repository. I'll say install and authorize. And then we'll write this once more. So it's my notes. I'll make it private, create GitHub. Right, so it's telling me these are the files that it's going to upload. I'm okay with them. So I'll say commit. And what you'll see is on our GitHub, we'll have this new app available. So this is the code that it has pushed. There's no new changes, so it has pushed everything. And this is the code, source code for our vibe coded My Notes app. So if we go back here, what we've covered so far, we created this note-taking application in Google AI Studio. I did see that the create folder option wasn't working as expected. But again, we don't want to spend time on improving the features of web app. Rather, our focus was to make sure we can add authentication and database persistent storage. So we did that. We pushed it to GitHub from AI Studio. We did that just now. As you saw, if you're already signed into GitHub from a different instance of AI Studio, you can basically go to settings. So GitHub settings, then go to applications. And just sanity check over here what if you already had a running AI Studio instance. So if you already had it, then you can revoke it. You can refresh the web page of Google AI Studio, and it will sort itself out. But this is the fun of doing things live, right? You sort of have to figure things out. Right. So now that we've done the first three parts, let's go ahead and deploy it through a custom link on Google AI Studio. This is the easiest part. So we'll go into Google AI Studio. We'll go into publish. So where did this option come from? We're on the main page. Go to settings. Go to publish. And if you've not used Google Cloud Services before, you're basically in the starter user section. So you can actually just use it for free. Once you've used Google Cloud Services, then you'd have to pay for this. So it's already suggesting me a name, noteorganizer.ai.studio. I'm actually surprised that this URL is available. So I'll click on publish application. So what this would do is it will provide me a custom URL that I can just paste in chat. I don't think it's such a good idea for you to share your email addresses and me to create users, but what I can do is I can make this publicly available so that this repository is available, and you can clone it on your own GitHub, import it into Google AI Studio like we did last week, and then begin using it. So this should almost be done very quickly. And until then, I'll try to make this public. So change visibility, change it to public. I want to make it public. So you can see previously it was private, so it was written private in this section. Now it's public, and I'll just copy this in chat for you so that if you want to try this out, you could. Last week, we did see how we can import a project from GitHub into AI Studio. So, I mean, you really can do this very easily. So now that this URL is available, so if you want to unpublish it, because in the starter pack, you can actually publish 2 web applications for free. And let's say you're already using free, but you have a new idea. What you can do is to unpublish one of those apps and then publish a new one. What I'll do is I'll copy the URL for this app if you want to just try it. Of course, you won't be able to log in. And I wouldn't, again, ask you to share email addresses for, uh, wouldn't want people to be doxing you. So, I mean, try this out. Now, let's say if I wanted, let's say, to start from the start, let's say you already have a GitHub URL. How do we go ahead? So you will clone this, or you could download this and then upload it again in your own repository. And then you'll go into Google AI Studio. You'll go into add files, and you can say import from GitHub. So what it would then do is take the same source code, and then you can sort of try the app that I just built in front of you. Now, in the final part, what we want to do is to deploy it on Vercel. Vercel is a pretty good cloud-based platform for hosting web apps, especially modern Next.js web applications. Vercel also allows you to host up to 2 applications for free. So let's go ahead and see how that works. The reason why I want to do this is because when we were doing Google AI Studio, we had already set environment variables. So let's go back to this Node Organizer application. And we had created environment variables which contained the URL to Supabase and the anon key. And we did not need to do this again for publishing the application. In Vercel, we would have to do so. So it's just a good idea for me to show you how that works. Right, so the way Vercel works, just like it did last week, you'll go to vercel.com. You can log in with GitHub if you want, or through username like email and password. We'll go to add new. Let's go to project. And we can import project from GitHub. So that's the reason why I say it's really useful if you were to import stuff if you were to push stuff on GitHub, you can just use it over and over again. So let's say we want to add, we want to create a new project. Okay, this is the previous one. Is there an option to add another one from? Okay, so we don't by default see our notes repository, my notes repository. So our repository name was my notes, but you can see that by default, we don't really see this in Vercel. Now, the reason for this is that when I set up Vercel during the Wednesday session, I only gave it permission to read one repository. So what we can do is that we sort of have to configure GitHub within Vercel so that it can read another repository. Repository access, we can give it access to all repositories. What I would probably do is to give it access to the select repository that I want to host. This would be my notes. I'll click on save. And what this would do is sort of provide me access to this repository in Vercel, and I can host it. So let's continue. Yep, everything looks good. So my notes repository is being loaded. Now it's available. I'll import it. And here's where you'll enter those environment variables. So we would have to enter those 2 environment variables for Supabase into Vercel so that Vercel can actually talk with Supabase, just as Google AI Studio was able to do so. So I'll copy this. This is the key, and the URL to our project is the value. And of course, we'll do this for the anon key, which is now called the publishable key. So it's possible if you're watching this when Google releases the new model, they may just call anon key as publishable key. Right, so we've set this up. Let's go to deploy. And what I'll do is, uh, we've already sort of tested the application from Google AI Studio environment. Once this deploys, I will log in using the email and the password from Vercel's deployment and try to verify that the data that we had created earlier would also be visible here. So this is our application. I'll write the email address and the password. Don't save everything. And now you can see that we have the same data present here as well. And I'll, of course, paste the link to this as well. So the idea is what we've done is we basically created an application using vibe coding. We configured authentication and persistent storage. Then we push the code to GitHub. This is incredibly essential. I'd always recommend that you do so. And then we deploy the application on AI Studio. If you don't want to leave the environment of AI Studio, except for Supabase, I would recommend that you do use Supabase for authentication. You could use Google products like Firebase as well. So use this. And if you're happier with Vercel, you could use this. I find Vercel to be a bit faster than AI Studio. But it could be that, right? I mean, this could get better. AI Studio could be a bit faster in hosting, but anecdotal evidence, I find Vercel to be a bit faster. And obviously, when you're creating an MVP, you want things to be faster. But again, these are just anecdotal things, and they're only applicable at this exact moment of time. I'm sure AI Studio would just get better very quickly. So this is how this works. So this was a technical session, and I wanted it to be remained focused. So rather than us trying to wipe code, spending 30 minutes on trying to improve the application, I just wanted it to be like really, really useful and concise stuff. So Raul, that's it from this part. If there are questions, please feel free to type it in chat, or I think Raul will moderate those questions.
Thank you, Dr. Zafi. This session has been really fruitful, and I personally learned so many things because I'm not from that technical background, so I was just trying to build applications in some way. So having this proper roadmap is, I think, really important for me and for all of our participants as well. So now, as we have moved to the end of the session, this is our Q&A segment. If anyone would like to ask any question, they can write in the chat, or you may feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. The floor is open for everyone. Dhanyawad so much. I think I'm reading it correctly.
I think someone had a question. I saw a hand raised.
Yeah, I think.
But that could just be like a misclick.
So let's wait for participants. Maybe someone is writing the question. So let me ask a question, Dr. Zafi. So since we are doing this vibe coding, and people like me, like we are not from the computer background, so there's so many things that are new for us, especially the terminologies and the stuff. So my question is, like, when we build such applications through vibe coding, and if we want to scale them and wants to add new features, or maybe we want to remove some features, so in that way we are actually touching the foundation of the code, or maybe the database, and that way we may mess up, and the application is not that workable. So what would you suggest for us to be on the safe side while making such changes?
So what I would recommend is, especially with vibe coding, is to build things incrementally. Because what we're basically saying to AI is, build if we say build everything, then it's very likely to not follow your exact instructions, because what is it really is doing is it's operating on so many files. So even such a basic note-taking application had quite a lot of files that it was working with. Now just imagine the code that we had for the previous web application that we created. It was even complex. Now this is for the dashboard. So the idea is that build incrementally, build piece by piece, and just be sure about what data you're asking users to enter. Maybe the best thing is not to ask them for their banking details, not to ask them for like their healthcare information. If it's possible, maybe to just don't ask them like their full names until you are sure that you can protect their data. I just showed everyone how we could actually see what the user, of course, that was me, but we'd entered dummy data. We could see what notes were written by this user. So you can imagine that unless encryption is implemented, such data could be available in raw text format to whoever is the admin. So just be risk averse. One thing that we talked about, especially in the initial sessions of this course, is that at the end of the day, someone needs to be responsible. And if you're the one using AI, you're responsible for it. So it's better to be risk averse. But I also see this as a wonderful opportunity. With vibe coding, we can build stuff. If we have an idea, we can just build stuff. Previously, you would say, all right, well, I can either go to my colleague who's good at computer science, or we need to hire someone from the internet to do our stuff. But with vibe coding, if you have an idea, just begin working on it. If you don't want to install anything on your laptop, use Google AI Studio. You're not installing anything on the laptop. Everything's on the cloud. And you can work safely in that respect. With Claude, we had to install Claude Code. With Codex, you'll have to install it as well. But if you're just going for cloud-based services, which are for free, you're not paying anything for it. You're just developing a skill. And just to close this particular question, it is quite clear that this is how the world's progressing. Everyone would be able to build stuff, so you might as well try today than at some point later.
Thank you, Dr. Zafi. So we do have a question from Soe. Is there a way to roll back while vibe coding? Is there a way
Yes.
to roll back? Yeah.
Right. So there are two ways that you can do so. If you're using Google AI Studio, what you can do is to go into settings and click on versions, and then you can select which version you want to go to. So what it does is it periodically creates different versions. And if you want to restore a certain version, let's say you want to go to the first part, you can click here and then you can click on restore version. So that's the first way that you can do so if you're just working on AI Studio. Another approach would be to use GitHub. So for example, GitHub is going to recognize different commits, and you can basically restore from a particular commit. So what GitHub would do is to basically create an image of what was your first push, and then the second one would be a difference from the push. So you can actually see what changed. So these are the two approaches in which you can basically work with version control. Now, in the first push, it was just a repository. In the second push, everything was added. So everything is green here. If I were to make another push after making a change, then you'll see some pluses and minuses. Minus means that a particular line was changed, some characters were removed. Plus means that something new was added. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, of course, Dr. Zafi, and I think that was a very important question. And if we don't have any further questions, we do have. From Naikitra, what type of files should we avoid uploading to GitHub repository building MVPs?
Okay, so something that you should absolutely never upload on GitHub is your publishable key. So this is like the free publishable key of Gemini. Never ever upload this, even by mistake. So make sure you don't do that. Make sure you don't, because someone else could find this and then use an API let's say Gemini API in order and then use your API key, and you would incur costs. So this is of course the free version. So uh, an individual can only use Gemini to a certain extent. So it might still be okay if this is accidentally leaked, but never push down API keys. uh, what you can push, by the way, are these two things. So the Superbase URL and anon key. Ideally, you should not, but even if you push these, it's sort of okay. Do not push the password for your main Superbase database, because that password will provide direct access. I can show you that password somewhere. The interface has changed over and over again, but it should be somewhere here. So basically, that's like the main database password. And the idea is that if that is leaked, then an individual can bypass all the security mechanisms that we have, like row level security, and still be able to access data. Besides this, you would not want to upload and like personally identifiable information as much as possible. Uh, if you're using GitHub and it's your the repository is private, in this case it's not. I set it to public so that everyone can access it. So if it's public, just try not to have personally identifiable information. Now, what Google AI Studio and Claude Code would do is it will have a file called as gitignore. So what gitignore does is it's not going to push certain information. So if we had environment variables where API keys would be stored, so this would not be pushed to GitHub. Even though it is available in the source code, it will not be pushed to GitHub. So AI would take certain care, but as a rule of thumb, do not upload API keys. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Zafi, for the detailed explanation. I think this answers the questions. We have another question. If you don't want to use the table anymore on Superbase, how to remove on it and code?
So there are two ways to do so. First, you can, again, prompt AI Studio. Let's say the structure of your app changes. So in this case, we have folders and we have notes. Let's say you want to have another section for categories. So you can actually prompt AI Studio that, hey, I want to have a feature where in addition to folders, in addition to titles, I want to organize my notes in terms of categories that I add. So write me a new SQL code. So what it will do is it will, through SQL, you can program Superbase that remove, let's say, previous entries, previous structure, and create a new updated one. That's the easiest thing that you can do. But what you can also do is to go into Superbase dashboard, go to database, and you can actually, modify it here as well. Unless you're really good at this, what I would suggest is to just ask the AI to write a new SQL code for you. SQL code could be exposed. It's sort of okay, but it's just better to modify stuff that way through programming.
Thank you, Dr. Zafi. So I think we don't have any more questions from our participants. So as usual, I would request everyone to please turn on your camera for a moment so we can mark your attendance. Thank you, everyone, for your cooperation. Let me just have a screenshot. And this is the last session, by the way. So, all right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Zafi. We learned a lot.
Thank you very much.
And I hope that our participants learned so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye, everyone. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful
Everyone, take care. Bye-bye.